You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. Joined live in the studio with Jim, our sound artist for Arts Transmission, who's working with the Sittingbourne and Kemsley Light Railway. Jim, it's great to have you back here in the studio.
Hello, Daniel. It's very nice to be back here again.
Well, I was hoping we could perhaps start off with a little bit on how your work's progressing and what you've been up to since we last spoke.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is have a look at the moon tonight. Sorry to go off subject. The moon, it's a very thin slither of a crescent tonight, and it's angled over almost to the horizontal, and it's wreathed in these beautiful gaseous clouds, so it's well worth a look. It's looking very beautiful.
I was going to say, we often get some lovely moons up here because you see them out to sea, so you often get some nice sort of moons up here, so I have to go out and have a look myself, actually.
Please do invite me back when there's a lovely full moon out there. I'll come and look and gaze at the moon above the sea. So what have I been up to? Well, down at the Sittingbourne and Kemsley Light Railway, been bedding in. The volunteers have been making myself and Daniel as well, who's fantastically been coming along for all the visits, been making us very welcome, which is really nice. So up to this point, we've really been, a key focus has been chatting to the volunteers. We've been doing some interviews with all the various people there, which is a great way to get to know everyone. And the thing about the volunteers at the SKLR is that the whole station runs around their commitment and the depth of knowledge and their enthusiasm. So one thing that's been really good to discover, just the really high level of professionalism behind the structure there. They've got various departments, as we've discovered. So as well as the obvious things like the loco engineers who keep the trains running, and the archive department who run the museum and look after the sort of various interesting artefacts the railway's inherited over the years, and coaches and wagons and catering. One department that's really interested me is called Permanent Way. What a marvellous name, Permanent Way. I had no idea they called it that. And if you don't know who the Permanent Way team are, or what Permanent Way do on a railway, they're the people who go out in all weathers, snow, rain, blistering sunshine, hailstorms. Doesn't bother them. They go off up the track. They get in a flatbed wagon, throw on a few tools, wheelbarrows, picks, a compressor, and some power tools, along with these lovely long things called sleepers. And sleepers are the pieces of wood that they lay in the ground to put the rails on top. They support the weight of the train. Now, I went up there the other day. I got an invite from Bob, who's like the CEO of SKLR, and he gave me this very interesting invite because he knows I've been looking to get various sounds and capture as many different sounds as I can from the railway, the life of the railway and what they get up to. So he invited me for a special trip up to Sittingbourne, where the Permanent Way team were laying some new sleepers. So I got to see them hard at work. And it's very interesting, when I arrived there was a huge hole in the ground under the rails, and the rails were just hanging above this huge hole. And the first part of their process was the pouring of ballast. So there's this fabulous sound as all this ballast was poured off of the flatbed truck into a wheelbarrow and then wheeled over and tipped into this hole in the ground. And then everyone jumps in with their spades and knocks it all as flat as they can. It's all done by eye, and very, very skillful work it is. And then they go up to the sleeper truck. They've got another flatbed truck with all these sleepers that they brought down from Wales, and these are slightly treated. It's slightly treated wood, so it will last longer. And they load these sleepers. They weigh quite a lot, and they kind of huff-puff over. Two people bring one of these sleepers and throw them on the ground with a great big thump onto the ballast. And then they knock them and position them under the rails. And again, it's quite amazing how quickly they do this. I think if you didn't have the skill to do that, you'd get in all sorts of trouble, because it needs to be more or less level. Then they put these metal plates on and drill them in with these power tools. That's when the compressor fires up into life, and screw down these bolts, and that sticks the rail down onto the sleeper. But Daniel, I was really thinking about the life of the sleeper, because that name, a sleeper, I just kind of, a sleeper, what a lovely thing to be a sleeper. And these sleepers, they can last around 30 years, a long time. And they always, the SKLR, the Sittingbourne and Kemsley Railway, always use wood. I mean, if you travel up and down national rail networks, you'll see they've gone for the easy option. They all use the concrete sleepers now, which probably last forever, I guess, and are easier to maintain. But the lovely thing about the wood is that it's such a beautiful organic material, and it has this life, and it's just so gorgeous. And over time, the elements set in, and unfortunately, the sleeper starts to rot. And then the insects, they get wise. They're quite wise, the insects. They go, oh, look at that sleeper. There's a little hole in the side of that. I think, I might spend the winter in there. It's going to be a bit warmer than sort of hanging out in a bush. So the insects penetrate, and then the rot really sets in. So at this point, you've got to think, is this sleeper still going to be doing its job supporting the train? There's health and safety stuff. So there's a process of finding out which sleepers need replacing. And this is what's, as a sound artist, is what's really interesting to me, is that they go out, and the way they do this, of course they can do a visual check, it's a good way, but most of the sleeper lives under the ground, like a mole or a termite. And you can see the top of the sleeper, but most of it's hidden away. So the technique is to go along with a rod and use your ears. And by tapping, you can discover, is that sleeper still good, or is it rotting away? And one other thing I say about the sleepers is, we also discovered from Linda, who's part of the gardening team down at the SKLR, is that when they dig up the old sleepers, they don't just throw them away, they carry them back to the SKLR, and the gardening team will select choice ones and bury them in the ground as homes for things like wasps and certain bees that like to live and make their nests in the wood.
And Jim, I think you were going to carry on about what you've been up to and how things have been going.
So what else have I been up to, Daniel? Well, I've been doing quite a lot of work editing voices of the volunteers who've been kind enough to give us lots of interviews. So there's been a lot of material to work through. And one of the things there is, although I'm doing sound art pieces and not documentary pieces per se, it's a really sort of important part for me, is recording the voices. I think the voices make up a sort of living archive of what the members are doing at that time. And, you know, one of the things that I'm really happy to do is that I'm going to hand these interviews back to the SKLR to keep, so they've got a record of the members at the time and what they were up to. And I think sound archives have their place as well. So it's nice that there's these spin-offs from the project. So as well as the core idea of producing radio programmes, that and we'll be starting those in April. Is it the 7th of April?
Yes, yeah, right at the beginning of April.
Yeah. So when we start transmitting programmes, but also that the material is also capturing like 360 degrees of life down at the railway station. So that's a really important thing. Now, something else I've been doing, which will be feeding into the actual programmes, are what I call sound experiments. So I'll give you an example of that. I've got this process that I use called cross-modulation. Now, cross-modulation, it probably sounds a bit like something the Daleks from Doctor Who would get up to, like, you have been bad, I will cross-modulate you. Well, no, actually cross-modulation is the process of taking two sounds, and you take the characteristics of one sound and you impose it on another and sort of change it. So it's a bit like if you're making some roast potatoes and you take a few sprigs of rosemary and you put them on top of your roast potatoes while they roast. The rosemary transfers these magical flavours into the potatoes and changes them somehow. So cross-modulation's taking the very basics of a sound, maybe the frequencies involved, and imposing them onto another sound and changing the way that sound comes out.
As a sound artist and sound designer, can you tell us about a little bit more about that? I was hoping, actually.
Well, there's quite a sort of strong link between working as a sound artist and a sound designer. Now, what is a sound? We've spoken about sound art before, so maybe I'll talk a bit about what's involved in being a sound designer. Now, probably a lot of listeners might not be aware of the way that sound can be used and sort of designed. It might seem like a subliminal thing, but obviously if you woke up in a forest and just used your ears, you would probably hear the sounds of birds and maybe a stream and the wind in the trees. It'd give you a clue to where you were. And sound designers can create a whole landscape of sound around you just by choosing the pitch of sounds, the variation of sounds, playing with time, playing with depth and where they place them and stuff. So sound selection, that process of sound design, sound selection creates an atmosphere. So probably an example, I can say an example of that, and it was like, for instance, you might think about something like a romantic comedy. You'd want to sort of set a mood, so you wouldn't expect there to be lots of screaming and monster sounds in there. You'd probably have like some cheery sort of gentle lapping waves and some calming happy sounds, whereas if you were to do a sound designed to disturb people, like for a horror film, well, there's a certain set of elements in there that, you know, they're quite repetitive really within that genre, within those type of productions, you know, be they for film or just for sort of museum or for atmospheres in an exhibit. So you'd expect to obviously hear stuff in the horror style of screams perhaps and scraping sounds and maybe distorted whispers and all those things that make your spine tingle.
By talking to the groups, the artists, and it's going to result in 3 pieces of sound art from each sound artist who's been working with all the 3 local groups, which is the local boxing club, the Sheffield Cultural Society and the Sittingbourne Kemsley Light Railway, who Jim is working with. And I was hoping you could tell us a bit about the early days and how you got into sound art and sound design.
Well, how long have we got? I'll start really, really early on, Daniel. I won't talk people to death with this one. Yes, the first sound I remember, in all honesty, was the sound of flies on the window in summer. The lovely sound of flies up against the pane. And there's just endless variation in this fly sound. And I remember that probably at the age of 3 or something, age of maybe 3.5, and it just got me interested in the sound of things, and I always had this love of sort of insect sound, bees and wasps and things that fly and make a noise, you know, that sort of soft sound of birds' wings flapping. So I suppose that led to my next thing, which was I was kind of a bit of a space kid when I was growing up. Some kids are sporty kids, some kids are, you know, into football and everything. I was a bit, but I was much more into science fiction, and going into space captured that's where my imagination and my heart was. And whenever there was science fiction programs on the TV or even things on the radio, I was absolutely fascinated. A lot of the sort of sounds they were using back then were, you know, were kind of quite original sounds. It was like there was a lot of electronic music, which was sort of a new thing. Now we're all used to electronic sounds now, but this was before the age of drum machines and everything. And in particular, I remember there was this series, and I'm not old enough to have caught it first time around, but when they were repeating it, it was an American series called The Outer Limits. Had a wonderful beginning, wonderful music, and one of the episodes I saw was called The Galaxy Being. And in The Galaxy Being, there's a scientist called Maxwell, which is very appropriate, because he's a very famous, the guy who sort of wrote a lot of the equations that underpin electromagnetic radiation was Clerk Maxwell. So they're paying a homage there. And this scientist, Maxwell, is having a look for cosmic background radiation, I think, which is unusual because it was 2 years before it was actually discovered by scientists from the Bell Laboratories. And this is cosmic background radiation is the noise left over from the creation of the universe, the Big Bang. So, and they find it as microwave radiation. So this guy's having a look, and funnily enough, being a sci-fi program, what does he find? He makes contact with an alien who's also looking for cosmic background radiation. So they get chatting like they do. It's a bit like pen pals, radio hams, people emailing across the cyberspace. And the thing is, Maxwell is a little bit silly, although he's a clever guy. And this alien says, hey, look, Max, whatever you do, don't turn up the power of your transmitter, or everything's going to go pear-shaped. And Maxwell goes, okay, I won't do that. And of course, does exactly the opposite. Maxwell is a bit bad and turns up his transmitter, and he sucks the galaxy being across space and time to the Earth. And the way they represented this in this program was by using negative. They turned the image negative. So black into white, white into black, is black and white show. And when this galaxy being is walking around, there's these fantastic sounds and whooshes and sweeping sounds. And I was just totally sucked into this. How do they do this kind of sound? I wanted to see behind the sort of screen, as it were, and discover where these sounds are coming from. And obviously it's something that didn't happen for a long time, but I think that's when it was really born in me, that love of sound and what it could be and what it could do, what it could sort of create in your imagination and where it could take you. Just a pure sound on its own. Shut your eyes and just be transported somewhere. It's our most marvelous sense, the ear. And that was early years, Daniel. I was talking earlier, before the music, about early influences.
That's right.
I remember this ad when I was growing up, and they had this advert, and they would have something like a very sophisticated, elegant woman sat in a beautiful chair, and or the flip side would be a very debonair man with a dicky bow and a sort of glass set next to him. Probably in those days, smoking as well, that terrible habit that people used to have that's completely disappeared from the world now. And they'd say something like, what do you get for the person who has everything? And I've discovered it down at the SKLR, Daniel, and that stuff is steam. That's exactly what everybody needs, is steam. It's the most beautiful stuff. Now, back to my early years. I was going to talk about tape machines, because the first chance I really had to experiment and start producing my own sounds with the tape machine. I was given this sort of very old tape machine. It was very, very kind of dodgy, a bit like getting an old car or something, or a rusty bicycle. And it was called a Ferguson, I remember. I have no idea what the model was. Who cares? But what this Ferguson machine had in it was the thing that really was the most beautiful thing, was called a magic eye. And this was a little green eye sat in the middle of it, just above the sort of transport. And this green eye responded to the level. So if you kind of shrieked into the microphone as loud as you could, it would glow bright green. If you kind of whispered, the little green light would barely flicker into life. So there was some strange connection there. If you sat in the dark with a microphone, just playing with the sort of levels was just so enchanting. This green light glowing and swelling and shrinking. But this Ferguson machine, it was interesting. It had 4 tracks, so you could record 4 tracks on it, and then you could flip it into mono, and it had 3 speeds. So for me, this was like endless fascination. So what I would do was I would put it in 4-track mode, which meant I could record 2 entirely separate tracks. So, for instance, I used to love getting out glasses and bottles and filling them with water and tapping them with forks. And one time I got some chopsticks from somewhere. I don't know when. I don't even remember eating Chinese food, but somehow I got some chopsticks, which are the perfect implement for playing glasses. Because the trouble is, if you get carried away playing glasses, fragile glasses with a fork, sooner or later you go smash and you're right through that glass and you're in big trouble with your mum. So the chopsticks were good, a bit more gentle, and I could sort of whack to my heart's content without breaking anything. And I'd record these sort of glasses, and then on the other track I'd make all sorts of wind noises or vocal sounds. And I'd put these 2 things together, and then I'd put the machine into mono mode, and it would play these 2 sounds together. And because you had 3 speeds, you could record the glass and your voice at high speed. And let me think, how fast was it going? I think it was 3.5 inches per second, and you could slow it right down to a fraction of that. It was always done in fractions, 1 7/8, and then heaven knows my maths has gone, but smaller than that. So you could play these sounds you'd recorded in real time, like really slow. They'd crawl along, and suddenly the sound of hitting a glass was transported from this ding sound into this kind of wah sort of sound, and your voice would become this bassy, frightening thing. And then the other thing I discovered was that you could lift up the tape, 2 spools of tape, if you remember those things, turn them over, hit play, and then these sounds would come out backwards, which was even more fun. So it was like incredibly exciting, to a sort of young teenager. And the things I thought was the only person in the world doing this. And I can't say I was crestfallen and disappointed to discover that, it'd been going on for a long time, and there was lots of other, far more sophisticated people, like the Radiophonic Workshop with Delia Derbyshire, people playing and manipulating tape and making compositions, Stockhausen pieces like Contactor, all those wonderful early sort of German tape pieces. But it did sort of give me put some power in my hands, if you like, and I think that's the great thing about cheap technology, or, getting hold of any technology is that kind of do-it-yourself ethic. That's the kind of really beautiful thing, getting your hands dirty. That's what it's all about.
Well, I was hoping, Jim, you could tell us a bit more next about some of your previous work and projects you've worked on.
Yes, certainly, Daniel. Well, there's so many things I've done, actually, quite a lot. I'm a very sort of low-key person. I'm not really someone who blows too much of a trumpet, but some things I've done. Interesting project was being invited to Canada for something called the Deep Wireless Festival, where I was asked if I'd come over and be an artist in residence for 3 weeks, and they wanted me to make a series of programs, 4 half-hour programs. So it was a wonderful offer. So I was invited over. I was put up in these almost empty halls of residence, because it was part of this educational university in Canada, and all the students disappear in May. They've finished up their courses, so this building was practically empty. And if you've ever been to Canada, it's quite odd. May is kind of their springtime, whereas we start to hit spring in the UK around March, and it starts to warm up and the days get longer. In Canada, they've got it's a little bit like Scotland, same sort of latitude, so they've got a sort of smaller window. So you can go there in early March and you can still be getting lots of snow. It can be icily cold. I went there, it was freezing. I was freezing. I had this one blanket in this hall of residence. I was sort of freezing, and yet I was sitting up all night, sort of shivering, but making this sort of work. But the beautiful thing about the festival, is run by Darren Copeland and his partner Nadine, was that they bring sound artists in from all over the world, and they also do lots of pieces involving surround sound, which are like multiple speaker systems, which are very interesting because they allow you to position sounds in space, so it creates a very convincing sort of real atmosphere out of sound. There's lots of meeting of other people doing their own sound works and stuff, so it's a great sort of time for people sharing their ideas and experiencing each other's work. So really important to development of sound art and contacts. But I was there doing these shows, and the idea was I was scripting these kind of shows from my immediate experiences. So I'd spend a day quickly creating a sort of script, and then with no time at all, I'd have to round up actors and people. So whoever was around, it was like whoever was passing, basically. They had a dedicated radio station there, but anybody passing through, like visitors, people's mums, friends of friends, and people driving past, anybody we could get, we would sort of drag in to read bits of script. So it was a real kind of a participatory art. So and very spontaneous, really, just finding voices and throwing them together. And there's a lot of energy in that, in getting people to read scripts, because it's very different to the thing of getting trained actors to do it. You pretty much have to go with what you get back. But I think the rewards are fantastic. There's a very special energy that comes out of working spontaneously with people and forcing them almost into this kind of unusual position where they're suddenly going, oh my God, I'm on a microphone, I've never done that before. And there's a very sort of particular energy and enjoyment that goes with that. So that was one project I really enjoyed. So probably opposed to that is something we were talking about earlier, was the sound design thing. And I did a project recently, this was last year, for the new Mary Rose Museum down in historic Portsmouth Dock. And it's really, wow, what a place. Go and visit it. Fabulous Mary Rose. And, oh, it's so beautiful, that ship. All that wood, all that carpentry. These were like the rocket scientists of the era of Henry VIII. He assembled this magnificent team of rocket scientists. I mean, these were people who could go and look at a tree in a forest and say, right, I know exactly what piece in the ship that tree is going to be from the bend of that oak tree. Yes, I know where I'm going to put that piece of wood. They could work it out just by looking at a tree, how would they plane this wood and which part it would occupy in the ship. And there's so much. If you've ever been down to see the Mary Rose or you've looked at a diagram, I mean, it's just endless pieces of beautiful wood put together. And it really, the engineering is astonishing. There's nothing in any way that isn't just absolutely amazing about the Mary Rose. So I was lucky enough to be asked to come and do some sound design for that. So, for instance, I had 3 decks to cover. And what we're trying to do is create the atmosphere of being on board the Mary Rose. So there was a sound design to do for the top deck, which was open to the sea and very kind of noisy, the waves sort of splashing over. And this is where they would house the kind of a lot of the soldiers that the ships would carry, because they were battleships. So basically, they're like warships. So they'd have these sort of castle decks and top decks with a few guns, but mainly these guys who would board other ships, and they were quite high up on the ship. And the idea was that they'd sail up, throw a bit like these pirate films, throw a load of boat hooks over, haul the other ship in, and jump on top of the other people. So they had all these marvelous nets on top to stop people doing the same to them. And then underneath that, there was the gun deck, and this is where it was loaded with all this fabulous cannons they found, and they managed to rescue a lot of these cannons because they were, Henry VIII spent a lot of money making these brass cannons, which have miraculously survived in the mud, whereas a lot of the iron pieces have rotted away, unfortunately. But there's a great variation of cannons there, these culverins, these breech loaders, different types they use, different weights, could fire different projectiles, murderous, horrible stuff when you read about it. The stuff they would fire at other human beings would give you nightmares. But there was a sound design for that deck, and that deck was more at the waterline, so there's a very sort of different change. You've got the sound of the waves lapping against the side of the ship. And then there was also the lower deck, which life below deck. So this deck's actually sort of slightly creepy underwater. So not quite like being in a submarine, but the total sound of how the water laps around the hull of the ship completely changes from being on deck. So as a sound designer, I had to consider these 3 different levels and how the sound would change. Just an example there. On the very top deck, they had the ship's bell, which they found, the original ship's bell, and I got to record that bell. It was played by the Admiral, who's down at the Mary Rose, this wonderful man who came in, and he struck the bell series that they do, 8 bells on the ship and 7 bells, and this gave the sailors the idea of time and when the watches changed around. So it's very key to the organisation of life on the ship. And we recorded this bell. And one of the things I was tasked with was to create the sound of the bell on the top deck. Well, obviously that was just the sound of the bell in the open air. But then, how does that sound when you walk down a flight of steps and you're on the gun deck? So, you're slightly shielded by beams of wood. So the sound is slightly muffled, it's slightly different. So I had to take this sound we'd made and process it to give you the sound of almost like hearing something on the other side of a wall, like for people who eavesdrop and like to listen to conversations on the side of the wall. There's that slightly muffled sound. But then again, they wanted the bell to carry through. It's a very precise ringing sound, very penetrating sound. They wanted the sound of that bell on the lower deck, under the water. So again, the consideration is, how does that bell, oh my God, we've got 1 deck, 2 decks, now right under the water, we've got the sound of the water all around, it's all very muffled. but you can still hear the bell. What does it sound like? This bell is made to ring all the way through this ship, so it kind of echoes slightly, but it's got a darker sound, a sort of richer sound, but it's still sort of penetrating through. So this was part of the sound design of Mary Rose. So this is kind of typical to the kind of peculiar but exciting things you're asked to do as a sound designer.
We are talking live in the studio at the moment to Jim, our sound artist, one of 3 sound artists from Arts Transmission, and it's all part of our project, Arts Transmission. And I was hoping, Jim, you could tell us what's next for the SKLR project.
Well, it's still very much a process of exploration, Daniel. We were chatting about using the tannoy system, which really interests me, because I will see it as a key part of the sound of a railway setup, is the sound of voices coming through those tannoys, echoing down a platform. It's a sound we're all familiar with. Anyone who's travelled on a train will have heard the 1943 coming from London Bridge to Kemsley will be delayed by 47 minutes. And in fact it's delayed by an hour and 62 minutes. But if you can have 62 minutes, I guess that's 2 hours and 2 minutes. Or sometimes the train's early. But we're going to get some suggestions from SKLR volunteers, the idea, and of some unusual, perhaps humorous and maybe surreal tannoy announcements that they can read and we can record, and will somehow feed through the finished radio pieces. I see them as a sort of syncopation, really, as a voice that goes on eternally, and almost if you're not there, it's like the sound of that tree, the famous tree falling over in the forest. It always sort of continues whether you're there or not. So other stuff. Well, of course, the key thing about the project for me is the voices, the volunteers, and what they have to say, and finding a way of working with that. So something they're developing at the moment is some sort of stories and tales that are based loosely around some of the interviews we've had and some of the wonderful anecdotes we've been getting thrown in there, getting some marvellous stories coming off of, both recent and the sort of history. There's such a rich history involved with the SKLR, all the people through the years, all the sort of members who've kept it going. Because, you have to remember, this is an amazing project to keep going. You think about it, running steam trains, some of them like 1905. These trains, they repair them, they fix them. They've got these marvellous gardens they maintain there. They run museums, and there's a shop and this very friendly cafe. There's all these incredible things, and it's all volunteers. No one's paid. I'm sort of amazed. It's like a kind of an affirmation of the very best parts of human endeavour. So it's such an honour to be down there, really. But so voice pieces. So looking into the stories and anecdotes we've been getting back, and somehow feeding them into the sound pieces to sort of get at the sort of essence of the SKLR. Beyond that, I've been looking at exploring some of the spaces acoustically, like well, you were there, Daniel. We were recording Alex, who's one of the coach and wagon department. Remember Alex?
Yep.
Yeah, and Alex was speaking. Can you remember the name of the coach we were in?
No, I can't actually offhand.
It's George something?
Stickler, yes.
George Stickler, that was the one. Yeah, we've got it. And we're in George Stickler. And this carriage was named after one of the founder members of the SKLR. And interesting enough, that me and Daniel went around. We did this investigation with a microphone, wandering through some of the rolling stock. There's a lot of carriages down there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
And some of these carriages have come from different parts of the country. There used to be I believe it's a military railway in Upnor, called the Upnor and Chattenden Railway, and this was laid by railway engineers, and I think it's partly, I'm not absolutely sure, I think it was partly sort of exercise to train soldiers in the arts of track laying. So they sort of, it seems to have hit two purposes, both in training people and in laying a railway, quite conveniently. And but the SKLR inherited some of their transportation carriages that they used to ride around in, and so we went through various carriages looking for particular sounds, and this the George Stickler carriage, which has been restored to operational conditions as when it was made in 1957 for the Industrial Railway, and the Industrial Railway was running then. This carriage, I think you agree, Dan, we found this was the carriage with the most interesting sound. So
yeah, it was a nice sound. I think actually I did a little update interview with you, and I'm sure that was in that carriage as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's our home from home on the SK. The George Stickler. Let me back in there. I'm going to spend the night there one of these days. And I'm hoping to do a piece. I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out. Like a lot of this project, there's a lot of experimentation on here, which is how it should be, I always feel. And I'm going to be looking at exploring the acoustic qualities of this carriage by using an interview recorded in there and feeding it back and trying to tease out the actual acoustic characteristics of this sound. So I'll keep you updated on that one. Hopefully it will produce some interesting results.
Well, we've been doing a little brain teaser with some sounds from the railway. So what I'll do, if I play that, Jim, and then if you could reveal what it is. And then there was another sound that you've brought up with you, and I'd like to play that. And then perhaps we could talk a little bit about what was involved in recording those sounds. But first of all, we'll play the sound that we've all been guessing. It's been great to have you along with us guessing these sounds. So I'll play that.
What was that sound? I wonder. Name that sound, they call it. Shall I reveal what it was, Daniel, at this point?
Yeah, that would be good if you could, yeah.
Okay, well, within the works shed, the main works shed of the SKLR, where they do a lot of the maintenance and restoration of the steam locomotives, and this is what the loco engineering department work on, those marvellous old engines. There's a machine that drives the power tools, and it's a bit like an octopus to my eyes. It's this large sort of old lump of blue metal with lots of bits and pieces to it that I don't quite understand. And stemming off from it are these various black rubber tentacles that lead to various power tools. So what is the sound? It's the sound of an old 50s British air compressor that drives power tools. The sound is an air compressor, a very, very old, beautiful piece of kit.
Yeah, it's got a lovely sort of rattly sound. We thought it was a bit like a sort of an old washing machine going wrong was one of the things that come to mind when I first heard it.
Well, you never know, Daniel. These old machines, they're capable of doing a lot of things. You know, probably it can do a bit of song and dance and a bit of washing machine as well. Compressed air, it's got so many uses. I was in the dentist the other day. I was driving along, I was down visiting the SKLR, and Bob was taking me down at Sittingbourne, went over a bump, and I've got this tooth that was reinserted on a post, and we went over this bump, and I felt like I've got a stone in my mouth, and my tooth had fallen out as we went over this bump. So I had to race off to the dentist's in horror, and he was squirting all this compressed air into my mouth to clean it up before he reinserted and re-glued this tooth back in there. So that also reminded me of this compressor. I'm sure it could have a great future in dentistry.
Sprayers use it as well, don't they? For spraying cars.
And yeah, spraying paints and everything. I mean, it's a multiple use tool, yeah. And I was really drawn to the sound, because as you move around the compressor and put your ear close to different parts of the machine, the sound changes quite rapidly. You know, and it's like a bit of a landscape, sort of just moving your head through a distance of about 4 feet, a metre or so. You can pick up all these different sounds, those different sensibilities.
We've got another sound that you recorded at the railway, so I'd just like to play that. Yeah, and it's it's a really nice one, actually, to listen to, this one. So this is probably a bit of an easier one to guess, but what was that?
Well, it's here's a clue. It's a railway, and the SKLR, while they're maintaining the steam engines, as is quite common with heritage railway associations, they don't actually run the steam engines through the months of January and February. And March, usually beyond a bit of testing. It depends on the railway, but usually the engines get a bit of a rest, and it's good because it's preserving their life. But there's still lots of work to do. They've got to take stuff up the track and move carriages around for the coach and wagon department so they can get at them, move bits of kit around. And so what do they use? They use a diesel engine. They've got, down at the SKLR, they've got in particular these two venerable, lovely old ex-Bowwaters. Well, I think one of them's Bowwaters. Can you remember, Daniel? There's one Bowwaters, one came from somewhere else?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Bowwaters only ever had one diesel, and I think they got an opportunity to have another one from another railway.
Yeah, and it would have been from another one of these 2'6" scale railways. It's the narrow gauge railways, so it does kind of limit the amount of stock they got. So perhaps it came from that the Welsh Pool and Llanfair railway, or was it from a military yard somewhere?
Don't know. It could have been. We did a nice interview with Bob, and he actually told the story of how they come to get it, though. I know.
Yeah. So we should if you let us play some of that, it'd be quite nice to hear that story. It's a lovely story how they acquired this engine. But that's the sound of a diesel engine. You hear at the start there's a little metallic clank as they sort of link it to a carriage, and then there's the distinctive, again air-driven toot toot of the horn, and then the engine kicks into life. Sounds a little bit like, what does it sound like to you, Daniel, as well?
I was going to say, actually, hearing it just there, a bit like a tractor, or one of those big sort of old traditional lorries that you imagine hearing, which lorries don't seem to sound like that now, but that sort of, I don't know, when you go to a steam rally or something, they've got the real old diesel lorries. It's got that real sort of sound to it.
Yeah, I call it a kind of a throaty sound. It's very rich and sort of deep. It's a bit like a baritone in an opera, a mechanical baritone. And it's interesting you should say that, because somebody told me that actually are engines they used in lorries that they put on these rail things. But the housing gives them a slightly different sound, but it is essentially much the same beast as a lorry engine.
I was hoping if you could have letting us know roughly sort of how you go about recording that, because I know myself with my mic that I take out for recording interviews, if you try to record something like that, you just never get that sort of quality. So what's involved in recording? So there's quite noisy and quite echo, especially the compressed air.
Yeah, there's I think it's just I've got a nice rifle microphone we talked about before in our first interview, Daniel, and that's very sort of accurate. It's very good, because I described it before as having almost like a kind of like a searchlight beacon effect. It only really records in a very narrow angle what's in front of it. So for starters, that helps you single out a sound, isolate a single sound that you want to get. So that gives you a purer sound than perhaps a lot of microphones that are made for all purposes. So you'll find on a lot of handheld recorders you get now, they're becoming more, they're still expensive, but they're more affordable, but they tend to be set up so they can record interviews and all around you. So they'll be recording from 120 degrees, 90 degrees, so quite a wide angle of sound they'll be picking up. But to get that very specific sort of sound, this is why these rifle mics are good for picking up. The second thing you need to do with these is be very careful with your levels, because these machines are actually very noisy, especially when you get up close to them. And I was getting sort of probably closer than you normally would with your ears. I mean, they're noisy things. But I'm interested. The sound when you've got a microphone and you move very sound to things, it's a bit like putting your head right next to a car engine or something. If you rest your head on the bonnet, it's going to sound very different from standing a few yards away. So getting in very close allows you to bring out various sort of tonalities and discover really the sort of very specific nature of a sort of sound. It's like a kind of micro investigation, like holding a microscope up to looking at different parts of a rock surface or something. You suddenly start to see this detail in there. So instead of just seeing a rock, you suddenly see a landscape, and you start seeing, my heavens above, look, there's this part of the rock, and that part's very different, and that's a different colour, and that's a different shape. And when you get in close on recording sounds, you get this very sort of micro world opens up. These differences, you start saying, oh, no, I'll move the microphone by an inch over there, and suddenly the sound gets much bassier and deeper. And you say, well, I'm going to move the microphone up by 3 inches, and suddenly you get this strange high-pitched rattling sound coming out. So, yeah, it's very, very much like using a microphone like a scientific probe with a lot of accuracy.
Well, Jim, if you're happy with we've covered everything, then I think we're finished off for this evening.
Well, Daniel, thanks for coming up again. It's lovely to be back at the Windy Ridge and BRFM. What a wonderful station this is, and yeah, great chatting again about the project.
Well, Jim, as always, it's great to have you along here, and I certainly look forward to seeing you next down at the railway. And of course, our listeners will no doubt hear the progress, and we'll see you when we start airing the final piece as well.
Indeed, we will. Good night, everyone.
That is Jim with us here at BRFM on the Monday night community show this evening.